when Jesus was crucified
Hmm.
and all the bodies came out of the grave,
Hmm.
was that would that be their first resurrection then?
Yeah, they are part of the first resurrection, one way or another. Whether or not they stayed resurrected at that time, or whether it was a resurrection similar to Lazarus. Uh, but it's interesting in 1 Corinthians 15 when Paul calls Christ the first fruits of the dead, because
Oh, yeah.
the first fruits, if we look back into the Old Testament and what exactly was the first fruits offering, the first fruits would tell you what kind of harvest you would have. If it was a measly first fruits, you could expect that you wouldn't have very much in the general harvest. If you had a really substantial first fruits, you expected there to be more. So it's actually not surprising when we look back to Matthew 27 and we see not just Christ came out of his grave, but believers came out of their grave as well. And so it shows us what kind of resurrection we're expecting, that it's not just going to be this one man who's physically resurrected, but we're expecting a great harvest. So I personally believe that they were resurrected in the sense of Lazarus in order to show the first fruits as being a profitable harvest that's coming. Um, and just like Lazarus, they would have gone to another natural death, but they are part of that first resurrection of the Old Testament saints. Um, Another interesting tidbit, and this, I mean, everybody's got to have their kooky thoughts. I've wondered if this is where the idea of zombies comes from, though, because
Yeah.
you literally have people coming out of their graves, and yeah.
Yeah. So would that necessarily include all the Old Testament saints, or just those that were in Jerusalem there?
It doesn't
You think?
specify. It's
Yeah.
pretty unspecific. Um, we don't have any other historical records of that having occurred either. Which, if it was everyone coming out, that probably would have
Mhm.
been something that was mentioned somewhere.
I would think so. Yeah.
So I would think it's perhaps I, my personal thoughts on this, which I have no scriptural proof of, probably those who shared a similar location with him in the garden tomb. It was a brand new graveyard. No one
Mhm.
else had been buried in that specific cave. We don't know if there were caves near it, but probably within his vicinity, believers were resurrected. Because
Gotcha.
there was all kinds of stuff that happened at the time of his resurrection that the the unbelieving Jews did record in their Mishnaic histories. Josephus recorded some things, but none of them wanted to admit its correlation with the resurrection of the one who claimed to be the Messiah. So they would
Mhm.
always relate it to the destruction of the temple. And they always said 40 years before the destruction of the temple, this great stone broke. 40 years before the destruction of the temple, this flame went out and wouldn't light again. They have all these things, and it's always this designation of 40 years before the destruction of the temple, which, if you go back, is the crucifixion of Christ.
Mhm. Interesting.
Mhm. So that's one of those things. I think probably either they did not want to record it because they understood the implications of it, and they really controlled the history books in Israel, or it wasn't so significant that it made its way to uh, other uh, non-biblical sources. Matthew, of course, records it because it happened, and he knew about it. He was present in Jerusalem that weekend. Perhaps he even saw one of them. But in Matthew 15, or 1 Corinthians 15, we get, of course, the list of witnesses that saw Christ's resurrection. In in John 20 and Matthew 28, we get another briefer list of people who saw him in his resurrection. We're not told who saw these other bodies in the resurrection, but we know
Mhm.
somebody must have seen them because Matthew records it.
Is he the only one that records it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's Matthew 27:53 or 54, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And it is a brief mention, but again,
Mhm.
it's scripture. It happened.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah, so here it says the tombs were opened, plural. Christ was in one tomb and there was no one else with him. Tombs, plural, would mean other locations. And many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many.
Wow.
Yeah. So it does say many. What many means, honestly, any bodies coming out of the grave would seem like a lot, but
Yeah.
many seems to be a kind of objective or subjective term there, but I would say probably a substantial amount. It was Passover weekend too, so they would be doing everything in their efforts to keep dead bodies out of the city, to the
Oh,
extent
yeah.
that when Judas is discovered within the city walls, they chuck him over the wall to keep him out, to keep the city clean that weekend. So here they're chucking Judas's dead body out, and all the dead bodies who have come to life are coming into the holy city. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'm thankful that Matthew recorded that, and it makes me wonder how many interesting things happened at that time also that weren't recorded. Because if that, which seems really significant, only gets a brief mention, imagine the other things that happened.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of unique occurrences that happened at the resurrection of Christ.